verse is a very famous verse, and it comes from the Canto 3, 25th chapter, which is entitled The Glories of Devotional Service anyway. And the verse is text 33. 3, 25, 33. Easy to remember. And this is one of the few verses in Srimad Bhagavatam which is not, an entire 4-line shloka. It's only 2-line shloka, but it is a very important verse for us to understand. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from 3:25-33. Jarayati ashuya kosham nigirnam analo yatha. Jarayati ashuyo ya kosham nigirnam analo yatha. Jarayati ashuya kosham nigirnam analo yatha. Very simple, very straightforward. Jarayati, dissolves. Ashu, quickly. Ya, which. Kosham, the subtle body. Nigirnam, things eaten. Analaha, fire. Yatha, as. And the translation by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki. Bhakti, devotional service, dissolves the subtle body of the living entity without separate effort. Just as fire in the stomach digests all that we eat. I'll repeat. Bhakti, devotional service, dissolves the subtle body of the living entity without separate effort. Just as fire in the stomach digests all that we eat. Please hear Srila Prabhupada's transcendental purport. Bhakti is in a far higher position than mukti because a person's endeavor to get liberation from the material engagement is automatically served in devotional service. The example is given here that the fire in the stomach can digest whatever we eat. If the digestive power is sufficient, then whatever we can eat will be digested by the fire in the stomach. Similarly, a devotee does not have to try separately to attain liberation. That very service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the process of his liberation. Because to engage oneself in the service of the Lord is to liberate oneself from material entanglement. Srila Bilvamangal Thakur explained this position very nicely. He said, if I have unflinching devotion unto the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord, then mukti or liberation serves me as my maidservant. Mukti, the maidservant, is always ready to do whatever I ask. For a devotee, liberation is no problem at all. Liberation takes place without separate endeavor. Bhakti, therefore, is far better than mukti or the impersonalist position. The impersonalist undergoes severe penances and austerity to attain mukti. But the bhaktas, simply by engaging himself in the bhakti process, especially in chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, immediately develops control over the tongue by engaging it in chanting and accepting the remnants of foodstuffs offered to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. As soon as the tongue is controlled, naturally, all other senses are controlled automatically. Sense control is the perfection of the yoga principle, and one's liberation begins immediately as soon as he engages himself in the service of the Lord. It is confirmed by Kapila Dev that bhakti or devotional service is gariyasi, more glorious than siddhi, liberation. Om Ajnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. So this is a very important shloka which tells us the greatness of devotional service. The power of devotional service is so great. Kapila Dev says in this verse that even if we wanted to be liberated from this material world, it doesn't have to be separately done. Liberation is a byproduct of devotional service. If we wanted to cultivate good character in our hearts, In today's world, when you want to develop good values, very often people attend self-improvement seminars, they attend conduct seminars. When they want to become peaceful, they attend mindfulness seminars. But they don't realize that all this is achieved very automatically just by sincere execution of devotional service. So that's why this verse says, Bhakti is so powerful. Just like the fire of digestion can burn all impurities, Bhakti can also burn all impurities in our hearts. The biggest impurity that we face in this material world, the one that keeps coming up always, is what we call envy. Envy very often is exhibited in vengeance, retaliation, retribution. The last time I spoke to you all, I think we were discussing that wonderful episode of how Prithu and Indra nearly became very envious of each other, and how just by the presence of Krishna, that envy was somehow managed. Again, Indra becomes the protagonist or antagonist, depending on how you see him, in this episode, in the sixth canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. In sixth canto, 18th chapter, there is a very interesting story. It is a curious pastime, I would say, of Diti and Indra. And this wonderful interaction between two very powerful personalities shows us how devotional service can correct whatever discrepancies that we have in our heart. So in this particular area that we discuss, you'll find that sometimes Prabhupada writes very nicely, in some purports. There is one purport in the fourth canto, 9th chapter, 29th verse. In fourth canto, 9th chapter, 29th verse. Prabhupada says very nicely, a pure devotee is free from any kinds of material desires. But in the material world, one's material desires are almost demonic. In other words, very often, we always think of each other as enemies. And when we cannot satisfy each other, then one thinks of revenge against one's enemies. So Bhagavatam actually addresses this very important and dangerous road that becomes an impediment to our spiritual life. This idea that we are envious of someone, or if someone has harmed us, we want to exact revenge on them. And Prabhupada says in the purport, very often in today's world, if someone aspires to be a topmost leader or a topmost person in this material world, they always compete with each other. And in material competition, there will always be these feelings of envy and revenge. Generally speaking, you will realize one thing, Prabhus and Matajis. When a person is materialistic in nature, they become very happy when there is something that can satisfy their senses. But when they see that others also are actually able to satisfy their senses, and they cannot satisfy their senses, that is the time when that person becomes fearful, envious, and sometimes dejected. And when they become envious and dejected, very often that envy can come out as anger. And it is very common in material world that we actually harm others. We actually harm others, or we even harm our loved ones. Sometimes, even in disputes between families, this thing becomes so painful that because you have hurt me, I want to retaliate and I want to hurt you. So actually, it is stated very nicely that one of the principles of this material world is that very often, in the name of justice and fair play, living entities very often conduct themselves on an eye for an eye basis. You have heard of that very often, isn't it? An eye for an eye. If you have insulted me, I must insult you. If you have hurt me, I must hurt you. If you have taken away something from me, I must find a way to take something from you. If I think you seem to have, if I think you seem to have been victorious over me, then I must find a way to exact revenge. It's always tit for tat, tit for tat. But my Guru Maharaj always said that we don't realize, and this is an interesting saying in English language, an eye for an eye only makes the world go blind, actually, isn't it? I take your eye and you take my eye. We're not left with anything much, actually. And this blindness is blindness to our own mistake. It is blindness to our own mistakes. And why is it there? The vicious cycle of taking the laws of nature into our own hands. This tit for tat is very dangerous. That's why Guru Maharaj would say, when a dog bites the man, Devaki, Does the man bite the dog? When a dog bites a man, it doesn't come out in the newspaper. But he told me, I can guarantee you, if a man bites the dog who bit him, it'll come out in the front page of any newspaper. Why? Because everyone knows that the dog's nature is to retaliate. But man has a higher nature, and man's nature is not to retaliate. We cast aside our humanity. We lose our purpose of living when we start retaliating with each other. And this is the nature of this whole material world around us. So in this 6th canto, 18th chapter, we understand this point very nicely through the interaction of Shukadev Goswami and the questions of Parikshit Maharaj. And on a deeper level, very often, the desire for vengeance and the desire for revenge in this world comes from one, pride and envy. And where does pride and envy come from? A deeper root to pride and envy, Bhagavatam tells us, is that it comes from a lack of proper knowledge of the signs of who we are. That we are not this body, but actually we are the spirit soul. So the result of it, Bhagavatam tells us, is when we retaliate against someone, whom we perceive has harmed us, for example, then very often the reason why we retaliate against them is because subtly we are proud of who we are. And we think that someone has either harmed us or harmed something that we own. And very often we think that we are the owners of our name, our fame. And we think that they have gained and we have lost. And we cannot take the pain or the insult, and there is no humility. And so without realizing, we have actually become envious of that person. So actually, Maharaj told us, and he discussed these pastimes very often, he told us that vengeance and retaliation amongst human beings almost always arise on the platform of an existing relationship. It's a very nice observation, actually. Very often, envy, revenge, they come on the platform of an existing relationship, not on an account of a superficial relationship. And that is why Kunti Mata warns us in her prayers, Bhutanam yan mitaha kalihi. It is the social intercourse between living entities that will cause dissension. So as devotees, for example, now in Zoom, the good thing about Zoom is you're all mute. Not really mute as in mute, but you're muted. So even if you wanted to chat with each other, if this was a congregation, you were all sitting, then everybody can look at each other. Oh, what nice sari or jewelry or dhoti or kurta you're wearing, what car you came in. And then after we have a program, when we're sitting down to have prasadam, we will talk about Krishna, but after a while we will veer away. With the Zoom, the good news is, there's only a virtual feast, right? You all can honor prasadam in your head, or hopefully you have prasadam in your home after the class. So because there's no social intercourse, there's very little moments of dissension. And the dissensions lead to revenge, retaliation, envy, anger. But Bhagavatam also tells us this important point. Retaliation exists among animals, but it exists amongst animals not on relationships. Very often you find animals retaliate. A snake will strike you. And Bhagavatam says it strikes you because of envy. But we also know the envy of the snake is retaliatory because it is in its nature. It is purely instinct. But amongst human beings, because we are so materially conditioned, reaction may appear to be an action, but vengeance is actually a feeling. This is an important point to note. Our reaction to someone may appear to be just impulsive, but in the heart, our vengeance for someone is very often a feeling, and a feeling is cultivated. So Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita tells us from pride and envy is born anger. And from anger, the fuel for vengeance and retribution will come. And very often we forget, that the best way to calm down this retaliation, this anger, is to understand the most important point that Bhagavatam tells us. As living entities born into this material world, we will always have the 4 inherent defects, isn't it? Every one of us is prone to committing mistakes. No one is perfect. Yet we expect everyone to understand when we are not perfect, but we expect the highest standards from everybody. When they relate to us, they must be perfect. But when we relate to them, they must be merciful to us. The second inherent defect we don't realize is that every living entity is an illusion. Illusion means very simple. We behave in such a way, we think we own everything, and we think that we can hurt people, criticize people, because we think we will live forever. That is the ultimate illusion. You must have time, to fall sick, time to criticize, and we don't realize time is running. So that is our illusion. The third defect that we have is our cheating propensity. All of us, Prabhupada writes very nicely that even though we may appear to be fool number one, but Prabhupada says we will still pose as intelligent. That is cheating propensity. Another time Srila Prabhupada said that even if a businessman tells you, actually, my dear sir, I'm selling you these goods and I'm not making any profit from it, he's actually cheating because he's making a profit from it, but he has to tell you that. So Prabhupada said, another time Prabhupada said in a conversation, cheating propensity means if I leave a dollar bill there and I walk away and I did not see it there, if possible, you will take it. That is cheating propensity. The higher goal of life is there for us to get across the cheating propensity and all these defects. But it's very difficult. Why? Because we have the last inherent defect. All our senses, Prabhu and Matajis, they're all imperfect. Very, very, very imperfect. And in that imperfection, we expect perfection from everyone. How is that possible? How is it possible? Another point Bhagavatam teaches us is that when we desire any form of revenge or counteraction against anyone, we don't realize that the only harm that is actually performed is performed on us. It's what we call the boomerang effect. This was told very nicely from Lord Vishnu to Durvasa Muni in the 9th canto, 4th chapter, somewhere in the 60-something verses, because Durvasa Muni had run everywhere so that Sudarshan Chakra would not catch him. But he failed. With Brahma, he failed. With Lord Shiva, he failed. And now he comes to Vishnu. And Vishnu tells him one very important thing. Even though I release Sudarshan Chakra, it is my devotee Ambarish Maharaj who must unrelease it. He has been a very kind person, did not do anything to you, and yet you wanted to exact so much of retribution and revenge against him. This is the point Bhagavatam is saying. And then he warns him, please know that any power that you use against someone, it is not actually finally that person who will be harmed. It is the person who commenced that action who is finally harmed. And we will see it in this pastime also. So we should be very clear that by counteracting against another action, no matter how sinful and how difficult it is, we ourselves have degraded ourselves into that bottomless pit of committing an equally sinful activity. There is a saying, in the Shastras, when you prepare and hold burning coal in your hand so that you can throw it on someone else and hurt them, you don't realize that when you handle and prepare the burning coal, you must become burnt first. Before you can burn someone else, in your handling of the coal, you will become burnt. And this is the premise on which we discuss this wonderful pastime of Diti vowing to kill Indra. Shukadev Goswami one day was asked by Parikshit Maharaj. Parikshit Maharaj asked Shukadev Goswami, my dear Shukadev Goswami, you had mentioned, that there were these Maruts. They are the great gods of winds. They are known as the Devatas. So they are actually considered to be administrators of the winds, the Maruts. But you mentioned that they were born from Diti. And Diti, as I understand, is actually the mother of the demons. How could Devatas be born in the womb of one who only gives birth to demons? Is it not that the Marut should have been born in the womb of Aditi? So this is how the pastime starts. Shukadev Goswami is asked by Parikshit Maharaj. And then Parikshit Maharaj also then asked him a nice point. I heard that there are 49 Maruts when actually there was only one. How did they become 49? How is it that being born in the womb of the mother of all demons, they were not obsessed with demoniac mentality? And I heard that Indra, the king of heaven, actually was the person who converted them to become Devatas. In those days also there appears to be a conversion process. that you can convert from a demon to become a devata. So Shukadeva Goswami, Parikshit Maharaj was very interested. How did Indra do that? Did he perform some rituals, some pious activity? And so Shukadeva Goswami became very happy. And then he said, let me tell you the story, this wonderful pastime of Diti and Indra. And you will understand how the Maruds came from actually starting to become demoniac and enemies of Indra, how they actually became great friends of Indra. And so Shukadeva Goswami says that when Hiranyaksha and Hiranyakashipu were both killed, Diti, their mother, became so angry, hurt, and upset in her heart. She became so morose, and she realized that the culprit was not Lord Vishnu. Very interesting. Diti felt in her heart that Vishnu helped Indra, but it was Indra who was the instigator to actually defeat Hiranyakashipu and Hiranyaksha. So Diti in her heart, condemned Indra. She started thinking, because she was overwhelmed with lamentation and anger, she began to contemplate as follows. She was saying this. She said that Indra is very fond of sense gratification. And because he is so fond of sense gratification, he has killed my two sons, Hiranyaksha and Hiranyakashipu. And he used Lord Vishnu to actually kill them. So actually, it is Indra who is very cruel. He is hard-hearted and he's sinful. I will only become pacified. I'll only become peaceful when I find a way to actually kill him. Then Diti said, Indra does not realize that when death comes, the bodies of even the greatest leaders and the greatest kings will ultimately be transformed into stool, urine, ashes, and worms. Nothing else. So if somebody with envy kills others like Indra did with Hiranyakashipu and Hiranyaksha, just to protect his interests and his position as the king of Swargaloka, then he will surely go to hell because he was actually envious of Hiranyakashipu and Hiranyaksha. What Diti didn't realize is everything that she said about Indra, she was already exhibiting. Isn't it so? She was already exhibiting anger. The way Indra was angry with her sons, she became angry with Indra. She forgot, the atrocities and the terrorized activities that her sons did. But she only remembered all the things that Indra did. Sometimes, even as parents, we extend our egos through our children. If we could not do something when we were young, we hope that they will do it, I didn't play the piano, so now you must play the piano. I could not do this, so my dream is you must become that. It's not their dream. It's actually our dream. In the same way, Diti also actually wanted her sons to be the Lord and dominion, to have dominion over this world. But when she did not get it, the death of her sons also signaled the death of her ambitions for having the great Hiranyakashipu and Hiranyaksha. The interesting thing is, Bhagavatam tells us, Diti, why wasn't Diti angry or envious of Krishna? She could have been actually, because ultimately Indra would have been nothing without Nrsingadev and Lord Varaha. And yet, Bhagavatam tells us the source of her anger was Indra. Why is this so? Our acharyas tell us that Diti realized that actually Krishna could never be vanquished by anyone. So she understood that. And that was actually the saving grace for her. This was the same saving grace that Kamsa had also. Kamsa's saving grace in Bhagavatam was that he knew that Lord Vishnu could not be killed. And that one saving grace, Srila Prabhupada says in his purports in the 10th canto, is what actually allowed him, when he was killed and vanquished by Krishna, to actually attain salvation in the Vaikuntha planets. He did not merge impersonally like the rest of them did, only because of one saving grace. Why do you think Diti had this concept, this faith that Vishnu could not be killed? Because of her subtle association with her husband Kashyap. Kashyapa Muni was a great devotee and Prajapati, and therefore his association had some bearing on Diti. This is the first point we understand, the power of association and the power of the association of any form of devotional service. Kashyap was not on the pure devotional service as the gopis. But even with what faith he had, he was still able to subtly influence his wife. So Diti was envious, but she could not direct the envy to Krishna. So she directed it to his general, Indra, not realizing that when you're envious of any living entity in this world, you are ultimately envious of the Lord. This we forget, you see. So thinking in this way, Diti was hurt, angry, disturbed. And what did she do? She began to constantly think of how I can actually get a child. And the only way she would get the child is to please her husband Kashyapa. So from that day onwards, Bhagavatam tells us, Diti became constantly acting in such a way that she satisfied Kashyap with her pleasing behavior. Whatever that Kashyapa wanted, she carried out his orders very faithfully. She served him with service, with love, with humility, and with control. And Bhagavatam tells us, if we can render this kind of service with love, humility, and control of our senses to our spiritual master, then how great and peaceful will our lives be, because our devotional service will really progress. Unfortunately, she used all these great qualities, but she used them for a purpose. So Bhagavatam is very astute about this, Prabhus and Matajis. We may have all great qualities inherently in us. Some of us are loving by nature. Some of us are humble by nature. Some of us, we control our senses by nature. We have all of that. But if all of this are channeled towards our own sense gratification or some subtle motive, then instead of liberating us from this material world, these things drag us eventually. Can any one of us compare the austerity, our austerities of waking up for Mangalarti with Hiranyakashipu standing on one leg for 60,000 years? We can't. But having said that, not one day did Hiranyakashipu wake up for Mangalarti. He didn't. He did not do that. He didn't spend a day chanting Samsara Dava because he didn't surrender to anyone. So having good qualities, but not using them for Krishna is a waste. So Diti had these qualities and she appeared to serve her husband very nicely. But Bhagavatam tells us, because she was driven by envy and desire, and because her activities were fruitive, there was a subtle hidden motive. And this is why the behavior of Diti is described by Shukadev Goswami as being false. It was false. Her service was actually false. So we should be very clear when we perform devotional service to Krishna. Even when we are serving the devotees, we should really contemplate and introspect and ask ourselves in our heart, what is our motive in serving them? Is it because we want name and fame from them? Do we want them to praise us? Do we subtly want followers? Do we want people? Is my aim to sit down and give Bhagavatam class because it is for my own sense gratification? We have to ask ourselves these questions. The power of such service can either make or break our devotional life. So Diti did all these things very nicely. Kashyap was a learned scholar, Bhagavatam tells us. But even though he was a learned scholar and he was a great spiritual personality, he was captivated by Diti's artificial behavior. He could not see through, And slowly she brought him under her control. When she pleased him so well, one day he called her and he said, "My dear, dear Diti, you have served me so well that whatever desires you have, I will fulfill." And Bhagavatam says such a promise by a husband is not astonishing, because that is the mood of a husband who's loving, and that's the mood of a wife that's loving. So Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, one of the great acharyas, he notes that in this particular episode, there's also another important point that we can understand. Even though Kashyapa was a spiritually elevated personality and he was a Prajapati, but devotional service is not the monopoly of one who is scholarly or one who is learned. Just because I may know all the shlokas of Bhagavatam and I may appear to be very scholastic in my delivery, does not mean there is devotional service. Devotional service is only the monopoly of Krishna. And Krishna will decide how to give this monopoly to anyone else. There's a nice verse from Katha Upanishad and Mundaka Upanishad. Sometimes Srila Prabhupada would actually quote these verses in Bhagavatam and Chaitanya Charitamrita. You could find the reference, but the verse, as I remember, is Nayam Atma Pravachanena Labhyo Na medaya na bahuna shrutena. Nam evaisha vrinute tena labhyas. Tasyesha atma vivrinute tanum swam. Very important verse. Prabhupada liked this verse. The translation is very important. The Supreme Lord is not obtained by expert explanations. He is not obtained by vast intelligence, nor is he obtained even by much hearing. That's surprising, isn't it? So the Upanishads tell us Krishna is only obtained by one whom he himself chooses. So the monopoly of devotional service is actually in Krishna's hands. He must choose. Not that we are learned. Vishwanath Chakravarti says being learned doesn't mean that Kashyap Muni was saved from the allurement of Diti. He was not. Why? Because devotional service is obtained by the mercy of Krishna. And by his mercy, he can then manifest that devotional service. So then, Kashyap then said, ask me whatever you want, and I will give you. He did not realize what she was going to ask. And so then Diti was just about to say something when Kashyap Muni said something very, very nice here. I just remembered that. He said to her, Diti, you have been a very good wife, and I'm very pleased by your behavior. So ask me whatever benediction you want. And if you want anything which is difficult to obtain in this world, I can still give it to you. Because what a boon is there in this world that cannot be given to a chaste wife? Now, this is a very nice point here, because Kashyap was actually thinking that he was in control of the situation. He thought Diti is going to ask me for something and I will just give tatastu. So subtly, he thought that he had the situation in control. But he didn't realize from day one that actually his wife was in control of the entire situation. And this is sometimes our problem in life, whether you're husband or wife, I don't know your dynamics, but our problem in this entire material world is that very often we think I have everything under control, only to find out that actually we are the ones who are completely under his control. A devotee should never forget that everyone is under the full control of the Supreme Lord. But Kashyap thought that his wife was under his control. So then he said, because you have worshipped me with great devotion, now you ask. So Diti, in the 37th verse of the 18th chapter, in the 6th canto, she then asked this question. She says, my dear husband, I have lost all my sons. Hiranyaksha, Hiranyakashipu were killed. If you really want to give me a benediction, I ask you for an immortal son who can kill Indra. I pray for this, my dear husband, because this Indra, with the help of Vishnu, he has killed two of my sons, Hiranyaksha and Hiranyakashipu. This is a very important verse because this frames Diti's mind, you see. She's basically checkmated Kashyap and said, now I want a son who is immortal and I want a son who will kill Indra. If you look at the word to word, it's very interesting because in the word to word, actually Prabhupada writes in the purport, the word to word is actually Indrahanam. And Prabhupada says in Sanskrit, the words Indrahanam means actually one who can kill Indra, but it also means one who follows Indra. And the word Amrita means one who is like the Devatas, because they have very long lives. They are literally like they're immortals. So think carefully. Diti was the mother of demons. She had demoniac mentality to kill Indra, but she wanted a boy or a son or a child who would be as immortal as the Devatas. So actually what she was asking was that Diti wanted a son equal to the status of the Devatas, but who would be an enemy of Indra. And Prabhupada says that is not possible. Because if someone is elevated to the level of the Devatas, of course they will be friends with Indra. See, we may use our intelligence based on envy and anger, but Krishna always has a way to cheat us, even if we want to cheat him. And this is what Diti was doing. Driven by envy, she had a subtle motive and she cheated Kashyap. And she tried to put this condition that the enemy of Indra, but actually in Sanskrit, the enemy of Indra can also be translated to mean one who follows Indra. If you follow somebody, you're not enemy, isn't it? Generally, you're a follower. When Kashyap heard Diti's request, he became very aggrieved. Bhagavatam says, he said, "Oh my God, alas, I face now the danger of of trying to kill Indra, which is the greatest impious act." Why? Because Indra is actually empowered by Krishna to run Swargaloka. All the devatas are administrative representatives of Krishna. Yes, sometimes they may be up and down, but even though they may be struggling, they are devotees of the Lord. And Kashyap's reaction, was that, what have I got myself into? Did Kashyap blame Diti? Did he get angry with Diti? If I was in Kashyap's position, I would say, what a terrible wife, or what a terrible son, or what a terrible person. I would say, how dare she do this to me? But Kashyap is a devotee. In Bhagavatam, I think it's 2 texts after that, 37, 39. In 39, he says this very important thing. I have become too attached to material enjoyment. He doesn't blame Diti. He looks at himself. And whenever we are put in a situation where we are bewildered, or it appears as if someone has harmed us, someone has cheated us, someone has taken advantage of us, instead of just concentrating on that person and actually taking association of that person, Kashyap shows us the great way of Bhagavatam. The great way of Bhagavatam is just point the fingers back to ourselves. Kashyap said, why should I blame my wife? It is just in her nature that she became very envious and angry. She lost 2 sons. I cannot blame her. But I am supposed to be a learned Prajapati. I'm supposed to be learned, and I'm supposed to have my senses under control. And because I became so attached to her sweetness, taking advantage of that, my mind, not her mind, my mind became attracted to the illusory energy of Krishna in the form of a woman. Just like a woman can become attracted to the illusory form of the Lord when he gives the form of a man. In other words, if we are not aligned to Krishna's interest, if we are not aligned to what Krishna wants, these are the challenges that we will face. And Kashyap then ends by feeling very repentant. He says, I am surely the most wretched person, and I will now glide down towards hell because I facilitated Diti's desire to kill Indra. And he says, this lady is just following her nature. She is not to be blamed. But I am the person who is alert to this. The condemnation is upon me. I'm not at all conversant with what is good for me, and therefore I could not control my senses. This is how we just stop the passage of anger, counteraction, and even envy. This is how we stop doing tit for tat. When a devotee does not see someone as being the cause of his difficulty, but sees the hand of Krishna, just like Kashyap was seeing, and laments his own failings, that devotee is protected by the Lord. You know why? Because the devotee has used his mind and senses to understand the world according to the perspective of Bhagavatam. And when Krishna sees a devotee applying Bhagavatam in his life, Krishna will protect the consciousness of that devotee as Rishikesha. Not only will he protect the senses and the mind, but he will direct them. And that is how initially Kashyap was caught. But because he was still a devotee, when he repented, Krishna was seen. That's why Bhagavatam, the unborn child, in the prayers of Bhagavatam, 3rd canto, 31st chapter, the unborn prayers, the beautiful prayer, the child says that Krishna, you can be perceived in the womb by one who is repentant. Atapyamanam hridayam namami avasitam. Very nice point. Atapyamanam hridayam. For one who is repentant in one's heart, Krishna can be perceived. Perceived means not only seen, but Krishna can be experienced also. This is a very deep point, and this is what saved Kashyap Muni here. And now Kashyap began to think, but at the same time, I cannot break my promise to her. I can't. I have already given my promise. I have given the benediction. I must give her a child. So this promise cannot be violated. But at the same time, Indra does not deserve to be killed. So what to do now? This is what I love about Bhagavatam. Bhagavatam is full of inexplicable situations, and then a transcendental solution is given. And doesn't that tell us how to live in this world? We are always faced with these inexplicable situations, always caught between the fire. You come out of the fire, and then you go into something which is more fiery. Sometimes you're caught between one person and the other, and you don't know what to do. But Bhagavatam tells us what to do. So Kashyap was thinking, in such an inexplicable situation, what should be the solution? And then Krishna gave him intelligence. And he says, the solution is actually very simple. Very simple. And so now Kashyap began to think, since Diti wants a son who must kill Indra, I will train her in such a way. I will give her instructions in such a way that instead of always thinking how to kill Indra and her mind becoming so absorbed in Indra, I will give her a process where her mind will become so absorbed in becoming a Vaishnava, in becoming a devotee. And if she agrees to the rules and regulations of the Vaishnava principles, then the unclean core of her heart will certainly be cleansed. This statement is given by Srila Prabhupada in the purport of 6/1843. Prabhupada, paraphrases the mentality of Kashyap. And it's so beautiful to read His Divine Grace's words. And Prabhupada says, if Diti agreed to follow the rules and regulations of Vaishnava principle, in other words, the message from Prabhupada to us is, if we are just agreeable to follow these principles of Srimad Bhagavatam, all we have to do, Bhagavatam says, is be agreeable. We may not even possess the great propensity, but at least start by being agreeable. What's another word for agreeable? Favorable, right? That's why devotional service must always be done favorably. Favorably means agreeably. Kamsa thought of Krishna so much, but he was not favorable. But Devaki Mata was thinking of Krishna all the time and she was favorable. Diti was not thinking of Krishna. She had put Krishna in the category with Indra. She was going to become International Society for Indra Consciousness. Imagine, I don't know what you call that. Huh? It's not iskcon. I don't know how to pronounce it. But International Society for Indra Consciousness. But now Kashyap was going to change that. He said, if I make her follow the principles of devotional service, this is the glory of devotional service, then Prabhupada says, the unclean core of her heart will certainly be cleansed. And this is the process given to us by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Cheto darpana marjanam bhava mahadavagni nivarpanam. This is the mood of Mahaprabhu. And Prabhupada states that in this purport. This is the process of devotional service. Anyone, doesn't matter, anyone can be purified by just following the principles of devotional service in Krishna consciousness. And Prabhupada says Krishna consciousness is so powerful that it can purify even the dirtiest class of men and transform them into the topmost Vaishnava. Just imagine that. So nice. This is how it should be. Prabhupada says sometimes Kashyap was worried how to make Diti into a devotee. So he decided, let her become a Vaishnavi so that she can give up the idea of killing Indra. Kashyap desired that both her son inside the womb, as well as her, should become purified so that they stop this idea of retaliation. And then Prabhupada says something very important in this purport. He says sometimes a practitioner of devotional service may deviate from Vaishnava principles. There is also a chance he may fall down. But Kashyap Muni thought, even if someone is going to fall while practicing Vaishnava principles, he is still not a loser. Isn't it so? Bhagavad Gita tells us that even a fallen Vaishnava is actually eligible for better results. Swa alpam api asya dharmasya trayate mahato bhayat. This is what Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita. Even a little progress in this path can protect our consciousness in devotional service. So therefore, Kashyap thought to himself, Diti, my dear wife, you had a master plan. Now I've got a master plan for you. But he didn't tell her what it was, of course. He had to cheat her, isn't it? This is how Krishna sometimes is also known as a transcendental cheat. Because we are always trying to cheat Krishna. But we don't realize that by the power of Krishna's material energy, we're always cheated by death. And by the power of his spiritual potency, we are cheated by Krishna to become devotees eventually. So please remember, we are right in the middle of this wonderful pastime. But an important point that comes across is that the solution to envy, anger, retribution, counteraction, too much absorption on material things is to submit to the process of devotional service. Very important. And it doesn't mean you have to be a pure devotee. It is, there's a nice verse. Oh, let me try and remember. 11th canto, 5th chapter. But for the life of me, I forget the actual verse. 11:5. Swapadamulam bhajata priyasya tyaktanya bhavasya harihi pareshaha vikarma yachot patitam katanche dhunoti sarvam hridi sannivishtaha. The verse starts with Swapadamulam. I think it's 11:5, 41, 42, or 43. You can look it up actually. But the meaning is nice. Okay, Balaram Prabhu has confirmed. Thank you. It's 11:5:42. Thank you, Prabhu. The meaning is very nice. Anyone who has given up any engagement, all other engagements, very important. Swapada Moolam means lotus feet of Krishna. And Bhajataha means anyone who is engaged in worshipping Krishna. And one who is worshipping Krishna, he is known to Krishna as Priyasya. Priyasya means one who is very dear to Krishna. We must behave and act in such a way that we become dear to Krishna. That is the purpose of human life. Just put this up in front of your bed today. That the purpose of our life is that we must act in such a way that we become dear to our spiritual masters and dear to Krishna. Very important. And anyone who takes shelter of Krishna in that way, who's always engaged in worshipping him, who is very dear to Krishna, then what happens? That person gives up all other material engagements. Very important. He gives up, the inclination to do material things slowly goes away. Even if there is some discrepancy, some fall down. Bhagavatam tells us, Krishna, who is seated in everyone's heart, what does he do? Dhunoti actions of that sins in the heart, and he immediately takes it away. Can you imagine? Sarvam, all, Hriddhi in the heart, and Sannivishta means he has entered into our heart. So the moment Kashyap started praying and repenting, Krishna appeared in his heart. The moment he became humble and said, I'm not going to counteract Diti, I'm not going to blame her, it's my fault, Krishna entered into his heart. Krishna gave him the intelligence. And therefore now he gets ready to advise Diti. And he says, my dear Diti, since you want this, I will give it to you. But there is a way to do it. You have to follow my instructions regarding a vow. And you must do it for 1 year. If you do it perfectly, you will get a son who will kill Indra. But if there's any discrepancy in your vow, my dear wife, and you don't follow the vows of the Vaishnava philosophy, you will get a son, yes. But the son will become not enemy, but very friendly to Indra, which is not what you want. So this point was well received by Diti. The moment Diti heard that, she said, yes, just tell me what to do, and I'll do it for a year. Anything, as long as I can get that child, and the child will kill Indra. That was what she wanted. So what did Kashyap say? Kashyap described a vow known as Pumsavana vow. The entire 19th chapter after this is describes the entire vow. But the essence of the vow is very simple. He said, the first thing he said in the vow is, if you want to follow this vow, you cannot be violent. That means no violent thoughts. She wants to kill Diti. She wants to kill Indra, right? But now his first principle is no violent thoughts. Second principle, You cannot feel that you want to cause harm to anyone. Okay. Then do not curse anyone. Don't speak lies. Then the small things like don't cut your nails and hair on certain times, don't touch impure things. Prabhupada writes in the purport to the 47th shloka, which is very instructive again. I'm just highlighting certain purports. Prabhupada said Kashyap's first instruction to his wife was not to be envious. And that's the very thing that she was afflicted by. And Prabhupada says the general tendency for everyone in this world is actually that we are all envious. And if you want to become a Krishna conscious person, Prabhupada writes in the purport, one must curb this tendency. Very straightforward. If we want to be devotees, we must curb this tendency. Why? Srimad Bhagavatam is meant for Nirmad Saranam. If we want to approach Bhagavatam, we have to reject envy. So Kashyap's instruction to his wife was not to be envious. And that indicates the first advancement in Krishna consciousness. My Guru Maharaj always said that if you study Bhagavatam, it must translate into behavior. And the first symptom of one who is progressing in devotional service, he said that, and Prabhupada writes in 6/1847, is that one becomes free of envy. It is the first stage of advancement in Krishna consciousness. So Kashyap Muni decided to train his wife to be a Krishna conscious wife. And in that way, he hoped that that devotional service will protect her and protect Indra. So he gave her all these different things that became the vow. And if you finish this vow in 1 year known as Pumsavana, then you will give birth to a child who will be destined to kill Indra. And so Diti became very happy. She said, thank you, my dear husband. And then she became impregnated. And with the child in the womb, she began following this vow. Now we're coming towards the end of this pastime. The moment Diti became pregnant, Indra, I don't know, in those days there was no social media, but they got their news very quickly, Indra knew already very quickly that Diti had already had this bargain with Kashyap. He knew also because he was a Devata, he was very powerful, he had Siddhi, much more powerful than social media. He knew Diti's mind, and he knew that Hiranyakashipu and Hiranyaksha's death would imprint envy and anger and retribution and revenge in her heart. So what happened? Indra understood Diti's purpose. And so what did he do? Because Prabhupada writes, self-preservation is the first law of nature. In text 56 of this chapter, Prabhupada says self-preservation is the first law of nature. So Indra wanted to look after his interests. This is the problem in the world. If each of us only look after our interests and we don't serve the Lord's interests, how can we grow in devotional service? So Indra started by reacting. I must now save myself. So he decided, let me go and serve Diti, and I will find some fault. I will pretend to be her very good nephew who will serve her, and I will try to make her break her promise. And so he went to see her and said, my dear auntie, how are you? I would like to serve you. Do you mind? Diti said, fine, I'm very happy to see you, my dear nephew. Actually, they were both lying to each other. And this is the symptom of envy, retribution, revenge, and lack of Krishna consciousness. We just smile sweetly at each other. Oh, Prabhu, how are you? I missed you. Prabhu, I also missed you. But we can't stand each other, actually. Nobody was missing each other. But we just say, oh, I miss you very much. So Indra said, auntie, I've come to serve you. Diti said, come and serve me. Diti in her mind was thinking, come and serve me. When my son is born, you are finished. Indra was thinking, let me serve you. I'll find something in you and then you are finished. So actually, in their hearts, they were not serving each other. And this is something we should avoid as devotees. If we cannot be honest in our hearts, then that association that we give to others is not devotee association. It is material association. So Indra served his aunt, but on a material level. He brought her flowers, fruits, roots, weeds. He brought kusha grass. He made everything ready for her exactly at all the proper times. And just like a hunter, Prabhupada, Shukadev Goswami gives this idea in Bhagavatam. A hunter to hunt deer will come in the disguise of a deer. So Indra, although at heart the enemy of the sons of Diti, he was outwardly very friendly. and he served Diti in a very faithful way. Indra's purpose was to cheat Diti, and Diti's purpose was somehow or another to kill Indra. And when Indra could not find any fault, he began to feel a bit worried. Oh my God, at this rate, what is going to happen? But one day, just before the year was up, one day, Diti was weak and thin. And because she was following everything very strictly, she unfortunately neglected to wash her mouth, her hands, and her feet after eating. And she went to sleep during that evening twilight. You know, that time of Gora Arti. Gora Arti time, we should not sleep. We should be singing Gora Arti. At that time, she was so tired, she went to lie down. Aha! That's the fault that Indra was finding. He must have had a long list. Aha, this is the one that she broke. So that would have given him the permission to destroy her. What did Indra do? He found the fault. And when he found the fault, with his mystic powers, he became small, and he entered into the womb of Diti. She was unconscious and she was asleep. The interesting thing is, when Indra entered the womb of Diti, wombs are normally very dark, right? In the womb of a mother, it is very dark. There's no LED lamps or, fluorescent lamp, nothing to light up. The child is in darkness for 9 months. But when Indra entered the womb of Diti, to her surprise, she saw that the womb of Diti was glowing. And he saw that the embryo of the child was glowing. It was like it was gold. And so what did he do? He was very amazed, but he had a purpose. He took his thunderbolt and he cut 7 pieces of that embryo. He cut it to 7 pieces. And when he cut it to 7 pieces, all the 7 pieces dropped off. And 7 living beings came out of the pieces of the embryo. And they began crying. This was unexpected for Indra. He thought the most powerful thunderbolt would just finish the child. But devotional service protected the unborn child. Shukadeva Goswami at this point says, Parikshit Maharaj, you remember you were protected. In the same way, even though Krishna did not come directly to protect, he came in the form of devotional service. And he protected the unborn child. See the power of devotional service. Even though Diti had ulterior motives, devotional service ultimately triumphed to protect the child. How merciful is devotional service? Imagine. So Indra got scared, saw that the child was crying, and then he pacified the 7 children because he was afraid Diti will wake up. Shh, don't cry, don't cry, don't cry. And then he cut them again, mercilessly. And 7 times 7, 49 children came out in the womb. And they all began crying. And what did they say? Indra, we are the Maruts. We are your brothers. Why are you trying to kill us when we want to follow you? When Indra saw that the Maruts were actually his devoted followers, then suddenly he said, if you are all my brothers, then you have nothing more to fear from me. Nothing more to fear from me. And then at that point of time, because Indra was so mesmerized by the fact that the enemies that were supposed to come were to become friends, he did not kill the Maruts. And at that point of time, Diti also woke up. Now at this point, verses 66, 67, and 68 are very important. Because over there, Shukadeva Goswami says that Diti worshipped Lord Vishnu for almost 1 year. Because there was so much of strength in her spiritual life and devotional service. That devotional service protected all 49 Maruts. Unknown to her, her child could not have become envious. Even though she started this progress, this journey by being envious, devotional service neutralized the envy and did not allow the envy to touch the child. It didn't allow envy to touch the child. So the envy was destroyed, and Krishna protected the womb of Diti. And the children became demigod-like, devatas-like. And one more important point Bhagavatam tells us. Because Diti was actually unknowingly, without even putting her heart into it, because she still wanted to kill, but she didn't realize that her vow was purifying her consciousness. And she became completely purified. When she woke up suddenly, she was shocked. She saw 49 children in front of her. She had given birth. They were outside. And of all people, her nephew who came to kill her, Indra, was standing there. The 49 children were as brilliant as fire. And they were in friendship with Indra. In friendship with Indra. But in text 68, was Diti angry? No, the last line of text 68, when she saw they were in friendship with Indra, therefore she was very pleased. She started by being angry. But when you perform devotional service, Krishna can transform anger into peace. He can transform envy into goodwill. This is the power of devotional service. And then Diti said to Indra, my dear son Indra, I took this difficult vow just so that the child born would be able to kill you. I prayed for only one son, but I got 49. What happened? And now she says something interesting. My son Indra, tell me the truth. Don't speak lies. And this was the same Diti who was actually conniving and contriving. She cheated her own husband Kashyap. She lied to Indra and said, come, my dear nephew, serve me. And yet now she wanted truth from Indra. And this is again the power of devotional service. Now, what did Indra say? What was Indra's reaction to this? And now Indra puts his hands together and he says, my dear mother, I was grossly blinded by my own selfish interests. Such a nice point. Huh? This is in text 71. I was grossly blinded by my own selfish interests. And in doing so, I lost sight of the bhagavatam principles of religion. So when we are blinded by our own selfish interests, we will lose sight of bhagavatam. We will lose sight of the goal of life. If ever, Prabhus and Matajis, we are disturbed, remember this point that Indra has brought up. We are not disturbed because of somebody. We are disturbed because we are grossly blinded by our own selfish interests. Indra said, when I saw you observing a great vow in spiritual life, I wanted to find a fault in you. And when I found the fault, I entered your womb and I cut the embryo in pieces. I cut it in pieces. But after cutting the child in pieces, by the grace of Krishna, each of the child survived, my dear mother. And today I realize that the child survived because of your devotional service. Because of your devotional service. In the purport of text 71, Prabhupada makes a very important point that actually concludes what we are speaking about. Prabhupada says that when Diti actually explained to Indra without reservation what she wanted to do, remember? Diti opened her mind and revealed, Indra, tell me now what has happened. Because actually I prayed for a child to kill you. That means without reservation, she became truthful. Then Indra reciprocated and he explained his intentions to her. And Prabhupada writes, thus, both of them, instead of being enemies, freely spoke the truth to each other. Sometimes we say, how to improve devotee relationships, especially when our heart is full of pain and motive and anger and criticism. If we are really performing our devotional service nicely, these differences will automatically be settled, like they were automatically settled between Diti and Indra. Diti became truthful, and Indra, without reservation, spoke also. And that is the qualification that results when we contact and touch devotional service. That's why Bhagavatam says so nicely in 5:18-12, right? The famous verse, Yasyasti bhaktir bhagavati akinchana sarvai gunastatra samasata suraha. If one develops a devotional attitude to Krishna, then whatever qualities that are found in the devatas, they are automatically in the devotees. Of course, someone may say, I don't want the quality of Indra, but the quality of devatas means good qualities. Good qualities. So because Diti started devotional service, she became purified. Because Indra touched the womb of Diti, he became purified. Because Diti did devotional service, her child became purified. And because her child became purified, the child did not want to kill Indra, and Indra did not want to kill the child. And so Indra repents. He says, today I have learned the power and the value of devotional service. And the reason why I behaved this way, my dear mother, was because I forgot that the real ambition of life is to become a servant of Krishna. That is the only ambition of life. Not to become the proprietor of Swargaloka, but to become the servant of the Lord. And therefore, Diti and Indra became very peaceful with each other. And Indra begged permission to leave for Swargaloka. The Maruds asked permission from their mother to go with Indra. Indrahanam, follow Indra. And they went with Indra, and they became powerful devatas, administering the winds on behalf of Krishna. And thus ends this wonderful pastime of Diti vowing to kill Indra. Did she succeed to kill Indra? No. What happened in the end? Devotional service killed revenge. It is devotional service that killed envy. It killed envy in the heart of Diti by Kashyap's merciful association. Kashyap's association finally triumphed over the association that Diti gave him first. When Diti gave him association, he became mesmerized and forgot Krishna. But when Diti decided that she wanted to kill, Kashyap repented and regained his consciousness. And therefore, association is so important in devotional service. When Diti took association of the Pumsavana vow, she actually took association of Vishnu. And for a year, all the envy left her heart. So if for 1 year she can become a devotee, then for all of us who have been practicing years and years of devotional service, please have faith that Krishna will definitely protect us from all these difficult tendencies. And when these tendencies come in our hearts, what should we do? We should seek good devotee association. We should increase the quality of our devotional service. And we should always remember, whenever we are troubled by others, don't become upset with them. Don't become vengeful. Don't feel ill about them. Because don't forget one thing. Just like Diti forgot that it was the Lord's wish that Hiranyaksha and Hiranyakashipu should be killed, we should also accept that whenever something happens to us, it is the Lord's plan. And it is meant to purify us. It is meant to cleanse our heart of all the material impurities. And that is our journey of spiritual character. That is our journey to come out of envy, to come out of revenge, and to come out of all these trials and tribulations. Jai Granthara Srimad Bhagavatam ki. Jai Srila Prabhupada ki. Jai Srila Gurudeva ki. Ananta Koti Vaishnavrinda ki. Nitai Gaura Premanande. Thank you, Anand Prabhu. Sorry I took a bit more time. And thank you to all of you who stayed on to hear. Do I take any questions, Anand Prabhu?
Yes, Prabhuji.
There is one question here from Achyuta Keshava Prabhu, always asking nice questions. Let me read it. You were mentioning in the beginning of the class that conflicts happen as a result of a disagreement and revenge and can be fatal not only to the victim but also to us. As devotees, how can we approach conflicts and disagreements and resolve these issues? In other words, how should devotees apply conflict resolution by not only solving the issue, but also reflecting the characteristics of a devotee? Nice point. I think coming from today's event and today's wonderful pastime, we can understand that the only difference that prevented Diti from exacting revenge on Indra and the only event that prevented Indra from actually trying to harm Diti and the child was the presence of devotional service, isn't it? It was devotional service that saved Diti. And why was Diti saved by devotional service? Because Kashyap's association was something that presented devotional service to her. So when we have conflicts between ourselves, it's very important to put Krishna in the center. It's very important to ask a senior devotee to give us their association and submit to the senior devotee and accept that whatever way they can resolve it is the Bhagavatam way. In Bhagavatam way, there is no I have lost and you have won. Indra lost and Diti also lost. But because they both lost materially, they won spiritually. So we should understand that when we take up devotional service, the way to resolve conflicts is not to count, oh, you do this and I must do that. No, that is again counteraction. It is just to be able to serve each other, to make sure that we both remember Krishna. And we put aside our envy, because we should understand that envy is related to the body, but envy has nothing to do with the spirit soul. So if we are not this body, why are we bothered with the envy that is actually bothering our body? It is not bothering our soul. So we should be very clear about this point. And those who are devotees must always see the hand of Krishna. It was Krishna's plan that Hiranyaksha, Hiranyakashipu should be destroyed. It was always Krishna's plan that Indra should be Lord of Swargaloka, for good or for worse. Krishna had faith in Indra, and Indra is actually a very powerful personality. So when we see Krishna's hand, then the conflicts and the disagreements are not important anymore. The important thing is, as Kashyap did, how we can become better devotees. We cannot change others, but surely we should just concentrate on changing ourselves. That is the best way, Prabhu, to reflect on our own characteristics. I hope that is useful, Prabhu. What else do we have here? Okay, I think that's the only question there that was given, actually. Are there any other questions that you have? I'm just answering someone privately. Okay, there's another question. Is it true when we are in dilemma in life, we can open Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita for our solution? Absolutely. And how does the solution come? The solution comes when we open the pages of Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita and we study, we submit, we accept, and we receive the instructions. And then we apply them. And when we apply the instructions given to us by Bhagavatam, by the purports, and by all the instructions of Krishna and his devotees, you find that in my experience, what little experience I have, there's never been a dilemma in life that doesn't have a solution offered in Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita. No dilemma in life has not been contemplated by Bhagavatam. Every single dilemma in life, Bhagavatam has a solution. It's only a question of whether we want to accept it, and we have the patience and the faith to execute it. Anything else? Otherwise, thank you very much, Anand Prabhu and Viraj Prabhu, and to all the devotees who have joined us. Forgive me for my discrepancies and for my inabilities. Radhashtami is coming in this coming week. The real meaning of Radhashtami is actually the appearance of Radharani. And she is known in Bhagavatam as Aradhita. Aradhita means one who renders intense devotional service to Krishna. If our devotional service is intense, if it is quality driven, if it is focused on pleasing the Lord without ulterior motives, then all these difficulties that we face, these different demons that come into our hearts, Krishna is so kind that he will purify us from that, actually. One last question very quickly. How did the Maruds reciprocate in a friendly manner with Indra when they did no devotional service? Nice question. They didn't do devotional service, but they were in the womb of their mother. So all the prayers that Diti was chanting, all the exercises of devotional service she was doing was purifying her consciousness, and mother's consciousness always has the effect on the unborn child's consciousness. Which is why when mother is very angry, child in the womb also becomes a bit angry and disturbed. You know, mothers will tell you that. So that's why the unborn child did not do devotional service, but the mother's devotional service was transferred to the child. I hope that's useful. Hare Krishna.